Olá, seus caralhos! This is jorgiguel, and welcome to a brand new video. On this video, I will be making, well, a magic card. What if I turned an FGO servant into a magic card? How would that look like? How would an FGO servant translate into a magic card? Go on. So what is the servant I'm going to be using? Obviously, it will be Mr. Gilgamesh. We're actually just going to drag the image right into the folder. There we go. We confirm it. It's a bit foggy, but that's because we're amplifying the image. We're zoomed in. And there you go. That's the size, the normal size that it's going to look like. This is, by the way, Carter Smith. MGU counts it. This is pretty decent site to make magic cards, custom magic cards. So let's try making a choice. This will be a process on how I make the card. I will leave in the video, the chapters, so you can just check the end result. However, this will be the process of making and explaining essentially everything there is about magic regarding card creation and whatnot. So let's talk about name. Well, we'll put a placeholder name for the time being. Let's just go Gilgamesh, King of Heroes, and that will be the placeholder. We can change this later on. However, the important part is which version of Gilgamesh we're using. We're using the Archer version. We can use the Caster and Kid version later on. However, for the time being, I will be using the Archer version. Also, regarding Noble Phantoms, Noble Phantoms probably would require an entirely different type of video to make. Will just be the servant and how he would translate into a magic card, because making magic cards is actually a lot more complex than you would imagine. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of things you have to think about, and that's kind of where we're going to go. So the first thing you have to think about when making a magic card is its color pie, combination or single color. What would Gilgamesh's color pie be? Well, one of them, by far, I think, would make the most sense, would be the white color. And the reason why white would be a color for Gilgamesh is very simple. Gilgamesh, the Archer version, his entire purpose is he sees himself as the king of everyone, and it is his responsibility to determine whether or not humans are worth, well, living. So he is mostly on the orderly side, even though his alignment is chaotic. It's chaotic because he does whatever he wants, which goes into another direction, which is the red, which is he does whatever he wants. He's very short-tempered. He gets angry very easily. So very simple color, red. And however, the chaotic part of him is he does whatever he wants and he doesn't care about other people's approval. So that would be the red side. The white side would be his orderly, in that you do what I tell you because I am your boss. Else you die, right? So that would be his other combination. He's very orderly. He's very in favor of humans, in favor of civilization. He wants all that jazz, and he wants more. So is there any color you could put Gilgamesh in? You could technically stretch it. You could say blue because he does have his Wisdom Noble Phantom. However, I wouldn't include blue, at least not in his Archer form, because even though he does have it, the reality is he doesn't actually use it, right? He is someone who lets his anger get the best of him, and he tends to just kind of let his guard down a lot of times. So he's not exactly the wise one. Caster version, yeah, sure, he would be wise, right? You would put him in blue, but the Archer version, I wouldn't include the blue. Green, yeah, definitely not green, because he is pro-civilization, which immediately puts him away from the green. He's also very against non-humans, as shown in Fate Stay Night, so you wouldn't include him in green. So the next question is, what about black? Would you include him in black? Well, if you're going by the generic, well, black is the evil color, you could put it in, right? Because his idea of cleansing humanity so that only the strong survive is kind of in the black side, right? You could say that. However, I actually disagree that that's more on the white side, in that I want order and this is what I perceive to be the best outcome possible, rather than in black, because black is more of I will do whatever it takes to get what I want, no matter the cost. which isn't how Gilgamesh functions. Gilgamesh does not want to pay a cost. Gilgamesh just wants things for free. He is not willing to sacrifice stuff, his own things for a goal. He's only willing to get what he wants, so long as he's sacrificing other people's stuff, not his own, which is not exactly a black collar theme, in my opinion. So, in my opinion, the Archer version would best be categorized by white and red. Now, as for the rest of the colors, I will think that will be a bit more later, because that's more on the balancing act of making a card rather than the beginning. So now that we have the color pie, the color identity of the card, which is red and white, we can move on to the next side of the card, which is the type. So type is very simple. We know that he's a creature because, he's a living creature, but he's also a legendary. So we have to go for legendary creature, right? Because he's a heroic spirit and he's a creature. So there we go. Type, legendary creature, very simple. You don't have to go much further than that. As for subtypes, the subtypes is essentially the creature type. So for example, if he's a human, you say human. If he's a spirit, you say he's a spirit. So heroic spirit, you could use that. However, here's the problem with using heroic spirit as a subtype. Each individual word you put in the subtype category is in itself a single creature type. So if you put heroic spirit as a creature type, what you're actually doing is you're putting spirit and heroic as two separate creature types. But you can't really do that because those are two unique words. So the best way to do would be just to follow whatever creature types already exist in Magic and to just kind of work with that. So for example, we don't put heroic because that's not a subtype, but we can put spirit, for example. So Gilgamesh is a spirit. We do know that servants are spirits. So he can be a spirit, so that would be his creature type. And we can add another creature type, which would be that he is a demigod, because he is, well, a half. Well, not half, actually. One third human and 2/3 god. So he can be a demigod. And there you go. And there you go. That would be his two creature types. You can add more creature types. However, the more you add, the more complex the more you're minimizing the letters in the card. So you do have to be careful with how many. Like, legendary creature already occupies a big chunk of the card. So you can't just chunk as many creature types as you want into the card. You have to be very selective. Spirit demigod, I think that's pretty good. I don't think there's a king subtype. Otherwise, you would probably also put it. Actually, now thinking about it, yeah, I'll put king also, just because because if I do make more videos about this, whenever I get to Sherazad, I will have to make anti-kings, and so I better put just the king. So there you go, Spirit Demigod King. There you go, that would be his subtypes. 3 subtypes, that's not very common. The common is, normally you'll get 2 subtypes per creature, although there are some anomalies, and I guess this will be one of them. As for rarity, obviously we go just for the mythic rare, and we leave at that. Watermark and alternative, we don't really do that. Okay, so now comes the most difficult part, which is the abilities. Actually, let me just grab one thing here. There you go. We put here Gilgamesh, so there you have something to look at. Okay, so ability-wise, so the best way to summarize a creature in Magic is, what is the first thing that pops up when you think about the creature? That's basically it. What's the first thing that pops up, right? Well, in Gilgamesh, in my case, the first thing that pops up is Gate of Babylon, right? The machine gun swords that he just fires at everyone, right? Sure, he does have Aya, he does have the chains, and he does have a bunch of other stuff. However, those are more like specified items that in Magic you would probably have to translate by making their own individual cards. However, when we're talking here is about his own abilities, right? And the first thing you think about Gilgamesh is, well, Gate of Babylon. It is the machine gun of noble phantoms that he just decimates his opponents. And that's kind of what I'm going to be doing in this particular video. I'll be making Gilgamesh into a card by using his Gate of Babylon and trying to reflect that in Magic. Now, obviously, I will be constrained because I cannot just go like, oh, make a bunch, choose whatever such whatever you want, you know. There is some balancing act you do have to make, and that's kind of what I'm going to try to make, right? As much as realistic as I can get from my experience in Magic. So, what would be the first thing that I would say that I need to think about? Well, the first one is, how do I turn machine gunning Noble Phantoms into an ability in Magic? Well, that Noble Phantoms are essentially artifacts in Magic, right? That would be the first start. Like, what are Noble Phantoms? Well, for Magic, that would be artifacts. Probably legendary artifacts, but we don't really need, for the purpose of this card, we're probably not going to use legendaries, because legendaries does have a unique rule that can only be won on the battlefield that's the same, so which wouldn't really work with Gilgamesh, at least not in the way that I'm thinking of doing it. So we first need to think of how do we translate that into an ability. And the first thing that I thought was, well, this. Artifacts you control have, then you open brackets, you put tap, tap, sacrifice this artifact, deal 2 damage to any target. There we go. There we go. So what does this ability do? Very simple. So long as Gilgamesh is on the board, every artifact you control, every single one, will have this ability, which is you tap it, you sacrifice it, and you can deal 2 damage to any target. Now, which I think does represent Gilgamesh's ability to just throw everything at an opponent very quickly as a damage dealer pretty well. Now, obviously, this will be changed probably as we're making the card. Just having this by itself actually isn't that good, but can be absolutely nightmarish in certain situations. So let's continue on. So that is how I would reflect his ability to just machine gun his opponents, right? Machine gun sword spam his opponents. So now let's think about his ability to summon weapons, you know, to summon those artifacts, because that's also part of his main aspects of abilities, right? His main abilities are, well, when I show up, here's a bunch of artifacts all around me. So how can I reflect that? And this is actually the hardest part, because if we're being very real, his ability would just be, whatever cost, pay X, search your library for whatever artifact you want, and just put it on the battlefield. And that would just be probably the closest to his actual ability. However, that could be way too powerful. And that could be way too powerful. The ability to just search your library for whatever artifact you want. Artifacts are very broken. Most artifacts just generate mana, and you could very quickly just turn that into a combo. So instead of that, I have a much more interesting idea of how to do it, and that is this. So we'll put this down below, and we'll make this. So essentially, when he enters the battle, so what is going to happen? When he enters the battlefield, you will look at your own battlefield, and you will count every single artifact you already have under your control. Then you will exile the X top cards of your library, where X is equal to those artifacts. So if you have 10, you exile the top 10 of your library. If you have 5, you exile the top 5 of your library. And then, until the end of your turn, you can play any artifact that was exiled through this ability without paying their cost. Now, that to me sounds a much more interesting ability, and seems like a good way to just showcase that, well, if you have a deck that's built around the card, well, you can just play him and dump a bunch of artifacts and just start killing everyone by just having those artifacts, tapping them, and dealing a bunch of damage to whoever you want. And to be honest, this in itself would probably be a pretty powerful ability. You know, if you had a creature like this, you could probably make some pretty powerful commander deck just built around him, where you just one-shot people once you summon him, right? You would still need to play a lot of artifacts, Because that's one problem. Is like you have to think about that part, right? This does seem broken to some degree, but you do have to build a deck around them. You can't just build, even if you go like mana acceleration, where you play a bunch of artifacts to provide you mana. There's not that when you play him, you're not gonna have that many artifacts out because most of those artifacts provide you sufficient mana to cast him. So at best, you'd probably just be, exiling the top 5. And sure, if you manage to hit 5 artifacts, that's pretty good value, especially if they're very high cost. But you could also just hit, well, more mana artifacts, which, again, it's still just 5 cards. The best way to do this would be by playing in conjunction with other cards that make more artifacts, so that you can then play him and you make a bunch of stuff. So, for example, play with Dockside, make a bunch of treasures, play this guy, get a bunch of more artifacts, throw everything at your opponent's face, and you kill him. That seems like a pretty decent number, right? Okay, so I think this would be quite good. However, there is one more catch we have to look at, and that is, what does these abilities tell about his colors, right? So these two abilities are very red in terms of how they function. Red is the color of exiling your top, basically any card that says exile the top cards of your library and you may play them. That's a red ability. That you do not find that. Well, there are some colors, there are some cards in other colors that have that, but this is generally a red ability. And the second ability is also a very red ability, which is the sacrifice artifact to do something. So, okay, we have this include. So we're gonna get there. Actually, we'll do that afterwards. So the problem right now that this card has is that it has a identity problem. In that, even though it does have white in its color pie, right? It is a red and white card, as Ada has decided. It doesn't actually have any ability that represents the white aspect in it. So this is where we are going to add a few keywords to truly make him at least a white color. So what would be a white color combination? Well, white is very famous for protections, right? Lifelink, First Strike, Vigilance, other abilities. However, the most common is protection. And I do think Gilgamesh does deserve some protection if you really want to put him. And as for his protection, we can make a very simple one. For example, protection from instants and sorceries. There you go. So what this was, which in my opinion makes sense, because Gilgamesh is someone who, in general, has, thanks to his armor and a lot of noble phantoms, he has a lot of ways to protect himself from instances and sorceries. We do know that he can reflect back sorceries and not sorceries, but magecraft by just utilizing a few trinkets here and there. So he's very well defended against magecraft. So there we go. I think this would make a pretty decent ability. So now let's go for now comes the harder part, which is the cost. Now, for this type of cost, what would be the correct one? Well, for starters, let's add in some more numbers. Let's put another white color and a red color. By this, he already costs 4 mana. Okay, so he costs 4 mana here with its 2 whites and 2 reds. But he needs to be more expensive, in my opinion, because that ability by itself is very powerful. And you don't really want a card that with that type of ability that can just swing the game to be very cheap. Because while the ability by it, technically speaking, if you just play him for his, with nothing, he does nothing. The fact is, because his ability is a very built around, when you build around him, you don't really want the player to just play him and then play a bunch of other stuff in the same turn that makes it impossible for other players to interact. So you kind of want him to have a pretty high cost. So let's put it at... Would 8 mana be too much? Considering the protection for... So that's probably not. Let's put him at 4. This is a cost... So at 4... Wait, no. There you go. Okay. Now it's showing properly. Okay, so that is the status. The creature type is done. Small text. Why small text? What's the difference between... Okay, never mind. And now let's include the power. The power, he costs 8 mana, it has protection. 4/4 is probably enough. He doesn't need to be that big. Wait. What? Oh, okay. There we go. He doesn't need to be that big. We'll make him a 4/4. Hold on, you can't really see it that well. There you go. Okay, now that we have that, we have artwork artist. Well, credit the artist whenever it asks for, okay? It's very important to do this. Okay, let's just put it here so that you guys can see it. Takeshi, and caricature. What is this? Realistic, funny, original art. I don't know what this would be. Proxy, funny, and glued, original art. Well, it's not original art because this is not my art. It's not funny, so I guess it's realistic. I'm trying to be realistic. Okay, let's check how this looks. There's something about the... it's too close. Oh, and it's really not looking well there. Okay, we need to fix some things here. There we go. And there you go. This is how Gilgamesh would look as a Magic the Gathering card. A very powerful, in my opinion, although he does cost 8, do not be underestimating the mana cost. Do not underestimate the mana cost because artifacts, by general, in large, do already provide mana. There's a lot of artifacts that provide mana. So just by playing an artifacts deck means that you will have a lot of mana acceleration, meaning that you can easily get to 8 mana by turn. 3, 4, depending on what you have available for you. So let's just publish this. Let's just publish it. So this is Gilgamesh as a Magic the Gathering card. Now, regarding his Noble Phantoms and whatnot, those will probably require their own unique cards. However, as an actual card, the best way to represent, probably something like this. He still has it. You can see that he still has his iconic, when I come in, I just fill the battlefield with weapons, and you still have that little keyword, the little mechanic at the end, which represents his machine gunning ability to just machine gun his weapons into his opponents, to just decimate them and killing him. He also has a little bit of protection from instants and sorceries because he's kind of immune to magecraft thanks to all the Noble Phantoms that he has at his disposal. So there you go. Do you like this card? Do you think you could do better? Write down in the comment and like and subscribe for more content if you enjoy it. Anyway, until next time, bye bye.